Hello, little fifth graders, and welcome to April 21st for the reading of Johnny Tremain. We are actually almost done with this book, and the next book we are reading is Alone, Yet Not Alone, and I know a lot of you were very excited for that. Think that's about it. Oh yeah, we gotta refresh. So refreshing our memories as to what has happened so far. So Johnny has gotten the information as to where the British are, how the British are attacking, whether it be by land or by sea, and he found out that it's by sea. He convinced the soldiers that he had gotten hit in the ankle, and even though he is 16, he was still able to play a child, and the soldiers just let him go. And he's getting all the information from where the British are attacking and who is going, all this stuff. He's getting it from Dove. So that's kind of where we left off, was the fact that Revere and Dawes were getting ready to ride. And if you all remember, Dawes was dressed up as a drunken farmer, and he did a really good job at it, that his wife had actually even poured alcohol on his suit, so therefore he smelled of it too. It's pretty funny. All right, so we're going to start off on page 252, and we will start there. All right. I'll wait until then. Why, Revere, I never saw you worry about anything before. I'll be a lot safer tonight than you'll be, catching crabs out on that river, being short at by the Somerset, and falling off horses. I'll not forget you and Parson Tomley's ambling jade. He was always ragging Revere about falling off horses. It was some old joke between them, which Johnny did not know, and both the men suddenly began to laugh. The mood between them had been heavy when Johnny came in, but now it lightened. They parted as casually as any friends who believe they will meet in a few days, but each knew the other was in deadly peril of his life. It was 10 o'clock. Dr. Warren told his colored man to make up a bed for Johnny in the surgery. The boy could not think of bed. He stole down to the common to see the secret embarkation. It was almost over, and was no secret. Hundreds of townfolk stood about silently, watching the boats returning from Cambridge shore and taking on yet another scarlet-coated cargo. But where these men were heading, and who commanded them, scarce a man in the crowd knew except Johnny. Farther down the river, he knew the Somerset was on guard. By now, Paul Revere was in his boat, trying to steal around her, and Charleston, the horse, waited for him. He saw Sandy step into a boat with never a quiver. He recognized Lieutenant Stranger's own horse, and for a moment saw the young man's dark face in the moonlight. Being a horse-minded boy, he noticed that there was a little trouble with the showy white horse built like Sandy, but much younger. This was Major Pitcairn's. Were the Marines being sent as well as the Grenadiers and light infantry companies? Or was the rough, genial, stout-hearted old major merely going along for the fun of it? At least he thought this observation important enough to report to Warren. Other spies had been bringing news of the embarkation. It had been noticed that Pitcairn was not in his usual tavern. He had been seen with a civilian cape wrapped about him, heading for the common. Doubtless he was going. Gage had sent him either because he knew he was a better officer than Colonel Smith, or because he had a way with Yankees. Everyone liked the pious, hard-swearing, good-tempered Major Pitcairn. A barmaid from Hall Street came in to say she had been watching the Somerset at just the time. Bentley and Richardson were rowing Paul Revere to Charleston. Not a shot had been fired. It was also known that Billy Dawes had woven and bribed his inebriated way past the guards on the neck, and the horse he was leading and pretending to try to sell had not looked like much. A thin, bony beast in a bridle patched with rope. It was one of the fastest horses in Boston. Then Dr. Warren told Johnny to lie down and get some sleep. It was almost midnight. Johnny took off his jacket and boots, rolled up in a blanket on the bed and the black man had made for him. The night before and the night before that, he had been much upset over Rab's leaving. His thoughts had turned to the empty bed beside him. He had slept badly. Although people were still about the surgery, exchanging ideas, trying to guess what the future might be, he immediately fell asleep. It was dawn. He was alone in the surgery and still sleeping. But out in Lexington on the village green, the first shot was fired. One shot and then a volley, and Major Pitcairn was saying, "Disperse, ye rebels, ye villains, disperse! Why don't you lay down your arms?" The war had begun. It was the dawn of the 19th of April, but Johnny Tremaine still slept. Chapter 11. So Johnny slept. It was daylight when he awoke, with Warren's hand upon his shoulder. Outside on Tremont Street, he could hear the clumping of army boots. A sergeant was swearing at his men. The soldiers were paraded so close to the house, which stood flush with the sidewalkless street, that Johnny at first thought they must be in the room. Dr. Warren dared speak no louder than a whisper. "I'm going now. Something's happened?" "Yes." He motioned Johnny to follow him into the kitchen. This room was on the back of the house. They could talk without danger of being overheard by the troops in the street. Dr. Warren had on the same clothes as the day before. He had not been to bed. But now his hat was on his head. His black bag of instruments and medicines was packed and on the table. Silently he put milk, bread, herring beside it, and gestured to Johnny to join him. "Where did it begin?" asked Johnny. "Lexington." "Who won?" "They did. 700 against 70. It wasn't a battle. It was just target practice for them. Some of our men were killed, and the British huzzaed and took the road to Concord." "And did they get our supplies there?" "I don't know. Paul Revere sent for me just after the firing on Lexington Green." The young man's usually fresh-colored face was haggard. He knew the seriousness of this day for himself and for his country. But everywhere the alarm is spreading. Men are grabbing their guns, marching for Concord. Paul Revere did get through in time last night. Billy Dawes a little later. Hundreds, maybe thousands of Minutemen are on the march. Before the day is over, there'll be real fighting, not target practice. But Gage doesn't know that it's begun. You see, long before Colonel Smith got to Lexington, just as soon as he heard that Revere had warned the country, he sent back for reinforcements. For Earl Percy, you and I, Johnny, are just about the only people in Boston who know that blood has already been shed. Were many killed at Lexington? No, not many. They stood up, just a handful. The British fired on them. It was dawn. Johnny licked his lips. Did they tell you the names of those killed? No. Did Rab get out in time? Yes, last Sunday. The doctor's clear blue eyes darkened. He knew what was in Johnny's mind. He picked up his bag. I've got to get to them. They'll need surgeons. Then, too, I'd rather die fighting than on the gallows. Gage won't be so lenient now. Soon as he learns war has begun. Wait until I get my shoes on. No, Johnny, you are to stay here today. Pick up for me any information. For instance, out of my bedroom window I can see soldiers standing the length of the street. Way over to the common, you find out what regiments are being sent and all that. And today, go about and listen to what folks are saying and the names of any of the British arrest. We know Gage expects to move his men back here tonight. If so, there will be a lot of confusion getting them into town. You watch your chance and slip out to me. Where'll I find you? God knows. Ask about. I will do so. They've begun it. We'll end it. But this war, it may last quite a long time. They shook hands silently. Johnny knew that Warren was always conscious of the fact that he had a crippled hand. Everybody else had accepted and forgotten it. The back door closed softly. Warren was gone. Johnny went to the surgery, put on his boots and jacket. The wall clock said 8 o'clock. It was time to be about. There was no leaving by the front door. The soldiers were leaning against it. Through the curtains of the windows, he could see the muskets. He noticed the facings of their uniforms. The 23rd Regiment, the narrow course of Tremont Street, was filled to the brim and overflowing with the waiting scarlet-coated men. Like a river of blood, he left by the kitchen. On Cornwall Hill could feel the subdued excitement. Everyone knew something was happening. No one knew what. Doors and windows were open, people hanging out, calling back and forth, or gathered in knots in the street. Johnny kept his eyes and ears open. Everyone knew about the secret expedition last night. Colonel Smith had embarked with 700 men and landed in Cambridge. That Gage was sending over at least 1,000 fresh troops to support him, anyone might guess. But the people of Boston knew no more than Gage that the fighting had begun. Johnny went to the Province House. All was as usual. The sentries were on guard. Young officers lounged about. One was already in his cups. Johnny could see that a group of them were playing at cards in the south parlor. Perhaps they were finishing off the game they had begun last night. He knew which was General Gage's bedroom. The curtains were still drawn. Colonel Smith's early call for reserves evidently had not upset the commanding officer. He had given the order which set Percy's 1st Brigade in motion and rolled over and gone to sleep. Johnny went to the common. He had already seen the tail of Percy's brigade lashing around Dr. Warren's house. The head of this scarlet dragon lay upon the common. The men were restless, grumbling, spitting, shifting their heavy equipment. Some had already been standing about for 3 hours. Johnny learned from one of their camp women what was causing the delay. They were waiting to be joined by a detachment of Marines. He looked about and saw for himself these 1,200 men were taking with them cannon and baggage wagons. The tension among the inhabitants was growing. What had happened? What was going to happen? Shops and schools were closed, and Johnny met a wreath of tiny children advancing and chanting, "School's done, war's begun." It looked to him they were shrewder guessers than their elders, who were trying to believe that not a shot had been, or would be, fired. Then, from over North Boston, way came the brisk rattle of drums. The 500 Marines, billeted all about North Square, arrived at double quick. They took their places in the ranks. Some were still buckling their equipment or eating the bread that had been tossed to them. They had been hours late, but when they had been notified, they came fast, tagging after them. Looking half awake and half dressed, Johnny recognized an old acquaintance. It was Madge, even fatter since her marriage and seemingly more in love than ever. Tears streamed down her thick red cheeks, and, all old animosity forgotten, she flung herself upon Johnny. "I can't bear it, but he says he's got to go." Nearby, tough little Sergeant Gale was strutting about like a bantam cock, roaring at one of his men whose buttons did not shine. He was pretending not to know that his wife was so nearby. He was really showing off in front of her and approved her presence. Men went to war and women wept. All was as it should be. "Sure he's got to go," Johnny comforted Madge. "But people say Gage is just sending out the brigade for exercise. They've been sitting about barracks catching fleas all winter. Why were the Marines late? Gage sent a letter to Major Pitcairn telling him to parade his men, but Pitcairn wasn't to home." "Pitcairn went off last night, second in command to Colonel Smith?" "Did you know that? The Marines didn't know until about 10 minutes ago." Johnny had to laugh. It certainly would hearten Dr. Warren when he heard how stupid the British had been. Gage had forgotten the Marine major had already gone, had sent him a letter, and then turned over for another snooze. Suddenly, there was silence along the whole great length of the brigade. Slim Earl Percy, on a white horse escorted by a group of officers, was cantering slowly across the common. 5 mounted men. The sun was bright that day, with only breeze enough to ruffle the horses' manes. flaunt scarlet riding capes, float the flag of England. Johnny was an Englishman. The sullen, rebellious people standing about watching Percy and his staff approaching, waiting for the brigade to march, all were Englishmen. That flag, it stood for Magna Carta, the Bill of Rights, Charles I's head upon a block, centuries of struggle for English liberty. But over here, there had grown up a border interpretation of the word liberty. No man to be ruled or taxed except by men of his own choice. But we are still fighting for English liberty. And don't you forget it. French slaves to the north of us, Spanish slaves to the south of us. Only English colonies are allowed to taste that forbidden fruit of liberty. We who grew up under England. Johnny thought of James Otis's words, upholding the torch of liberty, which had been lightened on the fires of England. Not since the soldiers had come to Boston had Johnny removed his hat when the British flag went by, except once, when it had been knocked off his head by a soldier. He started to remove it now, for the first time, and doubtless the last, thought better of it. It was too late. He knew the shooting had begun. The sword in Earl Percy's hand flashed. There was a command which was instantly picked up and repeated and echoed, and repeated again. The regimental drummers struck up. The artillery horses threw their weight against their collars. Wagoners cracked their whips, and the Scarlet Dragoon swung forward sluggishly at first, heading for the town gates. Thousands of separate feet merged into only one gigantic pair. Left, right, left, right. The earth shook to their rhythm. Johnny watched them pass. Every button was sewed on, every buckle in place. Every cartridge box held exactly 36 cartridges. Every musket had a bayonet, and there was not one old fowling piece among them. Every horse had 4 new shoes. It was a magnificent sight, but Johnny felt a little sick. What chance, what shadow of a chance, had those poor, untrained, half-armed farmers at Concord? Oh, God, be with us now. But even as he prayed, he kept an eye out for the regimental markings on the men's uniforms. It was the 4th, the 23rd, and the 47th who were being sent out, plus 500 Marines, plus a small artillery train and a few baggage wagons. 1,200 for a guess. The drums throbbed. The heavy dragoon marched on its 1,000 feet, and now above the drums came the shrilling of the fifes. They played a tune they always played when they wished to insult Yankees. For once more, Yankee Doodle was going to town on a spanking stallion, with that forlorn feather in his cap, asking those unmilitary questions. Poor Yankee Doodle. Whatever could he do against this great scarlet dragon? And we'll end there. All right, don't forget to take your 5-question quiz at the end of this. If you have to go back and kind of listen to certain parts just to kind of get a more clear answer on one of the questions, that's perfectly fine. I know you all have been doing so good in trying your best to answer them without going back and looking at them, but it's okay if you have to. All right, well, I hope to see you all soon. I know for sure I'll see you all tomorrow, which is going to be Wednesday, whenever you all see this. So I will see you then. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye, everybody.